Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. And if you think this is going to tell you how to get Pokemon Go, you're in the wrong meeting. I want to welcome all of you and everybody that's attending our remote sites over in Waimea, Nalehu, Kona, right, and Pahoa. This is kind of an interesting experiment. It's been a logistical challenge, both in terms of the technology and moving people around and things of that nature. But we think that this effort is worthy enough to get as much participation in different ways, and that's what we're doing with this effort. This is the fourth comprehensive review of the general plan, correct? Okay, yeah. The general plan, very simply, it's the long-range planning document, policy planning document for the County of Hawaii. It's in the county charter, and we have a mandate to review that document, every 10 years, more or less. I've been involved in two of the three comprehensive reviews. The first one was back in, I think it was early 1970. Well, the plan was adopted in 71, the first general plan. And we updated it in 73, 74, something like that. Back then, it was the maps and some of the graphics that you're going to see tonight. Back then, those maps were drawn by a team of draftspeople in the back room with colored pencils and ink sets and those draftsman things with the circles and the lines and all of that stuff. That's how it was done back then. And then what we did is we got an idea of what the map was going to be off of our review of the document itself, sent it to a printer in Honolulu, and he printed the whole thing up. And the next thing you know, the boundaries between land distinctions were probably about 1,000 feet wide. It's just that kind of technology that we were dealing with back in the day. And the review primarily was the in-house staff at that time, with resources from throughout the island, just kind of looking at the maps and saying, you think there's too much yellow? Yeah, maybe there's too much yellow. Maybe we ought to move the yellow a little more to this side. And add some crosshatch to this side. And that's the technology. That was the extent of the technology back then for the first two reviews. So, as you know, the draftsperson has gone the way of a GIS technician. All of us have iPhones, and the maps and the geographic components now, it's Google Earth. Can pop all of that stuff up. So basically, this particular effort has moved the process, the technology, and the data that's available out there right now is so immense. There's actually so much of it. It becomes a problem in gathering what you need, and you're always going to have more than you need, right? So what do you do with the rest? So for me, it's kind of an interesting process. It's kind of an interesting process where we are right now. I think we appreciate the opportunity to share what we're thinking of doing, the technology we're thinking of using with this particular update with as many folks as we can in these early rounds. So that's what tonight is all about. Let me see. Right off the top, maybe I can't see who's at the other remote stations, but let's right in the front, I guess. Eileen O'Hara-Ware is here. One of our new council. Almost. Dan, oh yeah, hi. Jen Ruggles is here up in the front row. Councilperson Danny Paleka is over there back in the back row back there with everybody else. Is there anybody else in this audience that I missed? Like I can't see who else is on the other side. Okay, that's good. So, am I going to introduce the team, or are you going to introduce the team?
I'm going to introduce.
Okay, April's going to introduce the team. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to April Supernaut. She's the manager for the Long Range Planning Division of the Planning Department, who's basically taking the lead for this particular project. We've been working on it since, what, 2013? Yeah, 2013 maybe, someplace like that. And a lot of it has been creating capacity so that, you know, we're able to come up with some of these indicators that you'll see tonight. So April and her team have done a terrific job in putting this all together. I'd also like to say that we've used a couple of prime consultants for the software and some of the hardware components to put it together, but essentially the bulk of it, you know, the logistical legwork and data gathering and things of that nature have pretty much come from within the planning department or various county resources. In my opinion, that's invaluable because these people will still be involved in the process long after, you know, any particular consultants that you hire are gone and staff has to interpret. So the combination that we have put together to do this project is something that I'm really looking forward to. So, April, take it away.
Thank you, Dwayne, and thank you all again for being here. Let me get used to putting my slides in. Yeah, thank you for being a part of this important planning process for the future of our county. Just really quickly, I want to point out everyone along this wall over here is our long-range planning team, along with our two guys up here up front, which I'm going to introduce them in just a few minutes. So your role here tonight is to share your mana'o, to see what we've been doing, to give us your feedback, as well as any other information you want to share with us tonight or anywhere along the process and throughout the process. We're at a preliminary stage in this project in reviewing the general plan, where guidance from the public and the stakeholders will be helpful in determining our best next steps. As we will soon explain, we'll be getting your direct input. That's what those little trusty keypads are for, like here. So everyone should have one of these. If you don't have one, we will get you one. So raise your hand if you don't have one and we'll pass one to you. So we're going to be getting your input, but we have a lot to cover in a very short period of time. So during the presentation, we're just so you know, we're not going to be taking questions. Instead, however, we have these little yellow forms. So please make sure you have these. You're welcome to have extras. They also have our contact information on them, so we have plenty at the table and we can pass them down the aisles if you need more. So just raise your hand and we'll get them to you. So feel free to take one of these home with you as well with contact information. Also, we are recording this session. So we are planning to put this online and make it available along with some polling information. So the questions that you'll be answering tonight will also be available online. So it may take us a week or so to organize it and get it uploaded, but we will let you know, and everyone else that we've been e-blasting to and sending notices to, we will let everyone know. So also please let your friends know if they were not able to come tonight or not able to come to Thursday night. A few housekeeping items. If you haven't been to this building before, the restrooms are to the right, to the center of the atrium, and then take a right, and then they're on the right. So 3 rights make it right. And we also request that you silence your cell phones so that they don't disrupt our presentation this evening. Oops, I did it again, Doug. That thing. But I'm good. I'm good. So now I'd like to introduce Doug Walker and Ian Farley. They're from Placeways, who are international experts in scenario planning, working all over the country and all over the world. Doug is the principal of Placeways and a nationally recognized practitioner of planning support systems. And Ian is a planner specializing in geographic information systems, or GIS. They are extremely knowledgeable, and we are thrilled to have them on our team. So I will welcome them properly in the So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Doug to continue this discussion and get on with the nuts and bolts and the goody stuff. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, April. Thank you all for the welcome. It's great to be here in obviously a special place, wonderful people. This team that we're working with is fantastic, and as the director says, is going to be a tremendous resource for you for years to come. So we're delighted to be part of this process. You're wondering about those keypads. If you're at a remote site, you don't have these. You have a paper form, and it has questions and answers, and you'll be filling those out as we go through the session. If you are here in the room, this is called a keypad, and we're going to be asking you questions. We call them votes. They're not really votes. They're really polls or just opinion surveys. But just for convenience, everybody calls them votes. So I'm going to give up on that. We're going to ask you a lot of questions. No right, no wrong answers. We're totally neutral on what the answers are. We're just interested to hear from all of you what you think. They're anonymous. However, we do ask that you keep your own keypad. We do some cross-correlation. People who answered this on number 7 answered that on number 10. So just hold on to your keypad if you would. If you don't like a question, you don't have to vote. I mean poll. See, I told you, I just can't get around it. So you don't have to answer all the questions if you don't want to. All right, everything's optional. We're just looking for your input if you're willing to share it with us. So please don't take them home. I heard somebody already make the joke. It's not a garage door opener. It's not a credit card. You can't send tweets with it, okay? It's just good for this, so please leave it behind. And there'll be baskets on the way out. So you want to try one? All righty. Okay, so there's, I don't know if you can all see this. There's a mark up here. It says polling closed right now. And there's questions. So you know you're from Hawaii County when 1, you call anyone older than you auntie or uncle. 2, you use Mauka and Makai as standard directions. Did you know that's not standard? I'm from Colorado. I was like, what? That's first time, but I'm down with it now. It's very good. Or you say ice shave instead of shave ice. That's yeah. Okay, so the way you answer is you just click, right? It's not that hard. Give it a try. Well, yeah. You have to wait till there's a green light, and once you see a green light, then you can do it. What you should be seeing is a green light on your keypad. If you don't see a green light, it's for one of 2 reasons. One is you didn't vote one of the answers. You put in 9, you won't get a light. 2 is your battery's dead. Does anybody have a dead battery? Not getting a thing? Yeah, just when you push it. Now, if you made a mistake or you just push the same thing twice, that's okay. We just take your most recent answer. Okay? So, yeah. Yeah, so you got to pick one. You got to pick 1, 2, or 3. You can't pick all three. We just take one answer. Okay? Everybody with me? So now I'm going to click a button, and that's going to close polling, and it's going to collate, and we find out the answer. According to all of you, number 3, ice shave is the way you can tell you're really from Hawaii County. Got it? Okay? So that's how we're going to do it. And let's just say, if you're in a remote location, there's a little number in the upper right here, next to where it says keypad polling. You'll hear us read the questions, but that's another way to follow along which question we're working on. Okay? So now I just want to run through some demographics. First one, where do you live? And these are the legally established judicial districts that we're working with. And it's a race. Yeah, so by the end of this, I'll have you doing them in like 7 seconds flat, you'll see. So there's 61, great. Let's see where it is. Okay, sounds like most people in this room live in South Hilo, Puna, and a few others. Good to know. Now this next one is, where do you live? And we're asking about a couple of terms that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the evening. So let me just make sure I'm clear on these terms. A town is, like Hilo, Waimea, Honoka'a, etc. A rural village or town is a smaller one that you'd think of as a town. And then we have this term we call underserved growth areas. So these are areas like Puna subdivisions, or Ocean View, HPP, Orchid Land. These are subdivisions, but they're low on services like water service, wastewater service, public roads, right? And then maybe you don't live in any of those, you live out in the country, or maybe you don't understand my explanations, in which case you're not sure, okay? So, yep, I'm looking for answers on that one. A few more. You stragglers, you're slowing down the whole group there. Okay. Okay. Oh, very interesting. Good mix. That's great. And very few not sure. Thank you. Okay, what kind of home is it? Single family? Something else? Good, good. You're getting fast. That's great. Single family, wow. Yeah, single family was hands down on that one. And how long have you lived here? I would never ask how old you are. Yeah. Oh, wow. Look at that. Most people in this room have lived here 25 or more years. Oh. That's great. That's just a lot of wisdom in this room. That's good to see. Do you have children in K through 12 school, private or public? Doing well or not doing well? We don't care. No. All righty. Interesting. Okay, and this one is, I always get flack on this one because everybody has 3 jobs, I know. But can you pick a primary occupation? And those are some options we tried to put up there to cover as many people as we could. Whoa. Okay. So the big answer on that one here in Hilo is retired. Second is self-employed. And third is nonprofit. Very interesting. Okay, so thank you very much for that demographic information. Now I'd like to introduce Ron Whitmore. He is a senior planner. I understand he's been with this department for 9 years. Before that, he worked in private sector and community development. And he is our project leader. He's a very talented guy. He's been great to work with. He has us all working at the top of our game, and we're privileged to be working with him. As you'll see if you haven't met him before, how he has a great command of all this and a great passion for it. So, Ron.
Thank you very much, Doug, for that fun introduction to keypad polling, and April for bringing us together this evening, and the introductory remarks, Dwayne. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of you here tonight, whether you're here live or at a remote site. We very much appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules, especially on a stormy day like today, to join us and help us with this general plan comprehensive review. We're going to cover a lot of ground tonight, so I want to start by giving a little overview of where we're headed. As April mentioned, primary objectives this evening are to share some information with you and then get your feedback. So the first three parts, we're going to share some contextual information. Doug's going to come back up, share some information about this tool we call scenario planning. And then we're going to share a lot about the path we're on as a community and a lot of the measures that we have to help us tell how we're doing along that path. So those are the first three parts. Then we're going to Doug's going to introduce us to this idea of alternative scenarios. That would be models that are alternatives to the trend that we're on, as a way of testing what would happen on some of those measures that we use to gauge where we're doing if we did things a little differently. And then we'll get your reactions to those, and then we'll wrap up. So before we dive in, I do want to acknowledge that we'll be sharing a tremendous amount of information tonight, and I know it can be overwhelming sometimes. And much of it is complex. We've done our best to present the information as clearly as possible. But as April mentioned, we do encourage you, if things become unclear, if you have any questions, please do write them down. Please do leave them with us before you leave. We'll use that information, get back to you for sure after the fact if you leave your contact information. So bear with us and please hang in there. Okay, first some context, and I'd like to start with the Planner's Challenge. To do that, I'd like to introduce Hilo, our faithful planner. If you're not familiar with that name, Hilo means navigator, appropriate name for a planner. Public planners like Hilo help people make informed decisions about land use and public investments. They gather lots of information, analyze it, and help people understand the trade-offs of different alternatives. Hilo will chime in here and there, gotta get my clicks down. Hilo will chime in here and there throughout the presentation with useful observations and insights. So the information flow with planners is multi-directional. So after we share information with folks, get their feedback and comments, we take that back and summarize it, do additional analysis, wrap that analysis and decisions that are made along the way into written plans, which are one of the planner's principal tools. And as you all know, we're here tonight heading in the direction of revisiting, revising, making recommendations for how to improve the general plan. A little bit about the general plan. So the general plan focuses on a county-wide scale. Planning horizon we're using is through 2040, so about 25 years out. It both establishes county policy and prioritizes other implementation actions. And it's important because all future land use and public improvements must be consistent with the policies established in the general plan. It's helpful to consider the scope of the general plan in layers. First, you have natural and cultural resources as well as hazards. Planning typically strives to conserve our resources and avoid natural hazards. Within that context, we establish land use policy, what to conserve, and where houses, businesses, and industries should go, as well as the infrastructure priorities to serve those land uses appropriately. It is largely the role of the private sector then to establish development patterns within the framework established by the general plan. Tonight we're going to think about these in terms of four layers. In the first, we combine conservation and hazards. In the second, we distinguish land use policy as a key component of the general plan. In the third, we consider infrastructure and services as key building blocks that need to complement land use policy. And finally, we discuss development patterns in relationship to those first three layers. Our goal is to align each of these four layers, thereby creating healthy, livable, sustainable communities. Okay, so any planning process usually starts by establishing clear goals, where it is we'd like to be in the future. Since the last general plan review, the county has adopted 4 community development plans, or CDPs, and 2 are near completion. In part, the CDPs were an opportunity to identify community-based goals. It was very interesting to note that the goals of the current general plan and those of the CDPs are very, very closely aligned. So what we've done for the purposes tonight, have integrated them and are using them as the starting point for the general plan review. So to keep things simple, we've organized those goals into 3 of the general plan layers. This is not a summary of all the goals, but for the purposes of this scenario planning process, we took out the ones that relate specifically to those 4 layers that I spoke about earlier. So we've organized them along those same lines: conservation and hazards, development patterns, and building blocks. What you'll see woven into all 3 of those are land use policies. So first, conservation and hazards. Pretty consistently across the island, amongst all the communities, people share the goals of protecting and enhancing our fundamental ecosystems, aquifers, coastal ecosystems, endangered species, protecting and restoring significant historical and cultural resources, preserving productive, viable agriculture land, protecting scenic and open space resources, and protecting life, property, and public investments from hazards. So that's conservation and hazards. Second, in terms of development patterns, the shared community goals across the island are to establish mixed-use centers. The idea there is that people like to have and find most convenient the ability to meet their everyday needs within a reasonable location, their job, their shopping, public services. It's also important, and we know this is a challenging issue in Hawaii County and across the state, is housing choices. And a big part of that is affordability. We need to make sure that people of all income levels have an opportunity to live in a safe, healthy home. And finally, and that you'll hear this theme throughout this evening, is this idea of proportionality, is making sure, again, that alignment between land use and development patterns and infrastructure is as well aligned as possible. Finally, in terms of building blocks, on the utility side, water, wastewater, et cetera, our goals are to have it properly regulated, adequate, efficient, dependable. Transportation, we obviously want efficient systems that move people to where they need to be in a quick and convenient way as possible. Provide people a reasonable level of public services, emergency health, education, et cetera. And then again, be clear about our priorities relative to the other parts of the general plan, making investments aligned with land use and aligned with development patterns, et cetera. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. We created this slide because we like to see Hilo's head spin. We also want you to know that we've been following the steps of a typical planning process. I'm not going to explain each of these areas. The main takeaway should be we're doing a lot of homework, a lot of important analysis. But fundamentally, we started by being clear about the goals, what it is we want to achieve. Then we wanted to make sure we understood existing conditions and trends. Thank you. Hilo has been working hard behind the scenes to analyze data and review existing policies and plans so we understand the opportunities and challenges relative to our goals. And then we also are weighing trade-offs of different alternatives. We have different choices to make as a community, and the more we can understand the trade-offs associated with that, the more informed decisions we can make. Hilo has been working hard to model alternatives to existing trends. And based on all that, we get lots of public input, and decision makers move closer and closer to a preferred future and plan, and that gets encapsulated into the planning document. All planning processes need to strike a balance between analysis and public engagement. In any planning process, it is critical to identify those points where it is important to get guidance. And we're at one of those points now. We've done a lot of background work, but we're at a point where we need to decide where to focus our energy. We need some direction from the public, so that's why these meetings this week are so important. So along those lines, we're going to bring, whoa, sorry, Doug, I think I hit a wrong button. Can you help me out here?
You were
I screwed up the view, sorry.
here.
Oh, there we go. All right. I need to get back over here. All right.
Yep.
There we go. Okay. So I'm going to bring Doug back up to get some preliminary sense of what your priorities are, those of you who are here tonight to help us with this public input. Thanks, Doug.
Now wait, don't vote yet. Don't vote yet. Wait. I'm keeping you on your toes here. Oh, you can sit down. Yes. Oh, first time he has took any direction from me. Just kidding. This is a triple vote, okay? So we're going to ask you to prioritize this list. These are the items that Ron was just talking about, the layers of community. And there's 5 choices plus no opinion. What we'd like you to do is tell us in rank order which you think are most important. So if you're in a remote site, put a number 1 by your first choice, a number 2 by your second choice, a number 3 by your third choice. If you're here in the room, push buttons in that order. So push your highest priority first, then your second highest priority second, third highest priority third. Okay. I'll give you extra time on this one. This one isn't a race. I want you to get it right. If you mess up, just start over again. I'll take your last 3 votes in that order. Okay. Ready? And let's see what you say. Oh, very interesting. Yeah. So said conservation first, cost of housing second, and traffic congestion third out of that list. Now, I'm going to ask you the same question, but this time, just for a mindset thing, I want you to think 2 generations ahead. So a lot of you are retired, maybe you have grandchildren. Think about them. If that's way off in your future or not part of your future, just think 25 to 50 years out, long out. And now vote again, but just do 1, your top priority. Okay, very good. Closing the vote. Looks about the same. Conservation came in first from all you, and cost of housing came in second. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so now I want to move us on to the next stage of the presentation, and I want to talk about this technique that we're using called scenario planning. The problem for Hilo is, how do you think this far out? How do you think 25 years? How does anybody know what's going to happen 25 years from now? Seems like a long time, right? Here's how we think about it. We say, okay, here's today, and there's the future that we want to be able to describe. Now, we're not trying to describe everything about it. We are not predicting whether or not there's going to be flying cars, much as we'd like to. However, we are very interested in how those layers of community are going to develop and where they're going to develop over time, right? So how do we figure that out? Well, we realize that it's going to be a combination of 2 things. One is what we would call external forces. These are things we can't control. And the main example here is population growth. That's beyond our control. It's going to happen. However, there are other things that we can make some choices about. We can choose our strategies. We can take actions or not take actions that will actually affect how the future plays out, right? Now, if we do nothing differently, that's not so hard to figure out. We just look backwards and sort of project trends forward with some subtlety to it. I'd say a lot of subtlety to it. But by which I mean a lot of thought, a lot of statistics, a lot of processing, a lot of experience goes into this. We come up with a picture of 2040 that we call the trend scenario. Okay, trend, everybody seems to get that. And then we say, well, what if we made some different choices from what we're doing today? Use some different strategies from those that we're applying today. Then what? Well, those are alternate scenarios. Okay? The way we describe the scenarios is generally by development patterns on a map, but we also measure them with a lot of numbers. We measure them just sort of statistically to describe them, but we also measure how they perform relative to the community goals Ron was just talking about. Okay, so this turns out to be a very powerful tool because now we have different pictures of the future that are telling us something about the choices that we're making today. That's the whole point of scenario planning. Obviously, we use computers to do this. As the director was saying, things have come a long way. It's really terrific technology these days. We're using software called CommunityViz, which is based on geographic information systems and has been used about 10 or 15 years for this kind of thing. It's state of the art. It's pretty neat. The way we do the scenarios is, very importantly, we start with demographic forecasts. And these are coming from a firm called SMS Hawaii, which is based here, and they've been doing this kind of forecasting for decades. Then we add to it a lot of sophisticated algorithms that forecast how things are going to play out, and that gives us the scenarios. The way we do the measures is a combination of computer-based and expert-driven modeling formulas and calculations, and that tells us these answers. Indicators is what some people call them. Okay? Basic concepts with me? Okay. That, you don't have to keypad that. That was just, you can nod. Okay. Yes, with me. Okay, thank you. Okay. Now, how do we present all this data? We use a special kind of chart. It's called a double donut chart. Does that sound delicious? What's the other one? Masala? What? Yeah. I don't know how to say that one. So these are donut charts. Okay. Basically, what they're measuring is they're like pie charts with the middle cut out, and they're measuring percent of households. Most of us, the numbers we're going to give you is percent of actually not households, housing units around the island. And you read it just like you read a pie chart. You start at the top, you go clockwise, and a given ring represents a particular number of houses. For example, right now there's 75,100 housing units on the island, and this chart is showing us that about a third of them are doing something. I can make another ring that's bigger. That's the number of housing units that we're forecasting for 2040, which is 110,600. That's a lot more housing units, right? And you can see, maybe 40% of them are doing something. And then I can mush them together, and ta-da, it's a double donut. Get it? And it's nice because you can kind of compare existing to future very easily in this kind of visualization. So, for instance, let's see. Right now, the inner ring, that's the existing condition, says 34% of homes, have donuts for breakfast, right? And in the future, 42% of homes are going to have donuts for breakfast, right? If that's too hard, don't worry about it. Just look at how more blue means more homes, a bigger percentage of homes. Okay? Great. You can nod again. Yes. Thank you. Okay. Great. Very helpful. Now, Hilo would like to point out the numbers we're going to show you are island-wide numbers. So, local results may vary. We're not talking about your backyard. We're talking about the whole island. Okay. The main thing on all these numbers is they're guides. We want you to use all these models, all these forecasts as guides, which is no more and no less than that. We think that these numbers are important because they help quantify effects and trade-offs of all these issues we're talking about, and it's good to know to be making informed decisions. But it's also important to realize that they're not everything. As the director said, the data that's available to us is tremendous. We have an abundance of data. That's been terrific. And I think it's very safe to say we're using the best data that is available. And there's a lot of it. We're also using these very sophisticated computer models. But having said that, we don't have all the data. We don't know everything. We never will. There's never enough data, right? We are using averages, so we're not predicting every last little thing. And after all, to go back to the beginning, it is 25 years out. We don't, even a really smart computer can't figure all that out perfectly. So what we say about these numbers is they're approximate. There's some wiggle in them, but they're directionally correct. So for example, if you look at that chart, you can see the top bar and it has a little error bar. That means, you know, we're not quite sure within that range. And the bottom bar similarly has a little error bar, not quite sure within that range. But we're pretty sure that the bottom bar is bigger than the top bar. Got it? So it's guidance. It can tell you something. So bottom line is we want you to use these numbers as guides to your understanding and making choices here tonight and throughout this process. Period. No more nor less than that. We think it's very useful. We don't want you to spend all your time stressing on the exact last digit. So is that clear now? I actually will ask you to do a keypad just to make sure that you understand what I'm saying about forecasts as guides to understanding and making choices. Okay, great, you got it. Phew, glad. Okay, so with all that sort of background, I want to now turn it back to Ron, and he's going to talk to us about the path that we're on.
Thank you, Doug, and apologies to the remote site. We got word that sound was cutting in and out, so we'll try to stay closer as speakers to the secondary mic here that is feeding your audio feed. So, and Jeff, if you can't hear me back there, just raise your hand again and let me know. Thanks. Okay, so thank you, Doug, for that great introduction to scenario planning. So we covered some of the important context, that important scenario planning tool. Now we're going to spend a fair amount of time, and a number of us planners are going to come up and share with you information about trend that Doug mentioned, that first scenario, that path that we are on. As part of the presentation is a summary of what Hilo has learned so far about existing conditions and future forecasts. And we call that trend, as Doug mentioned. In this part of the presentation, we'll share the highlights of what we've learned and record your reactions. We do that as a prelude to the next part of the presentation, in which we present alternatives to trend. And again, we'll share those and get your feedback. And we'll use measures, as Doug already explained, at each of those stages to inform your reactions to the information. We'll also get your feedback on some fundamental choices about how hard to influence development patterns and how much to invest in existing towns and villages versus underserved growth areas. Several important questions we'll ask during that process is what your priorities are. Force you to make some choices between option A, option B, option C. At this point, the analysis is relatively high level, and you will help us decide where to do more focused analysis, both by goal area and place. One thing I do want to quickly say, Doug mentioned that the numbers we're sharing tonight are island-wide. That's not to say that we don't have data at a finer scale. We have, in many cases, data all the way down to the parcel scale. And so we have a tremendous amount of flexibility in what questions we ask about different geographic areas. Okay, so we're going to take you through each of those 4 layers of community. Starting with conservation and hazards. As a reminder, quickly, the community's goals related to conservation and hazards are to preserve natural resources and historical and cultural resources, preserve agricultural land that we know to be productive, preserve and protect scenic and open space resources, and keep all of us and our investments safe. Thank you. And to do that, we're lucky to have Hilo is very lucky to have Bethany Morrison as part of his team. She's a resident expert on conservation and hazards, and will walk you through what we've learned so far about that topic.
Thank you, Ron. Tonight we're going to look at 3 types of resources that are the most influenced by the policies established in the general plan: sensitive ecological areas, agricultural land, and open space. Most of the land area in Hawaii County can be considered part of this conservation landscape. This map shows sensitive ecological areas, which include watershed protection areas, conservation areas, and other public reserves. Between those areas and the developed urban areas, we typically find the agricultural land. Thanks to the University of Hawaii, we're able to now map the known productive agricultural lands. When put together, the conservation areas and the agricultural land provide a significant amount of open space, attributing to the rural character of the Big Island. As Doug had introduced us, we have some double donut charts to help us understand how development patterns currently impact this conservation landscape and how we're forecasted to do in the future. These charts are showing the percent of homes built on sensitive areas. For example, you can see that today 13% of homes here are built on productive agricultural land. In 2040, it's going to be about 12% of homes. Now, that's still more houses on the ag land than today, but a smaller percentage of the total. The forecasted numbers may seem relatively small or insignificant, but some place-based analysis will be needed to understand options for minimizing development impact on these resources. In a few minutes, Ron will get your input on one tool that could be employed to specifically protect productive agricultural land. We'll now shift to natural hazards. As we all know, Hawaii County encounters nearly every type of natural hazard. As shown here, you can see coastal flooding shown in the blue area, wildfire hazard with the red being the most hazardous areas, and the lava flow hazard zones with red being the most hazardous. These natural hazards have been mapped and need to be carefully considered when planning for the future. When we look at these in a more regional scale, you begin to see communities that are at risk to certain hazards. A good example is the Lower Puna area, where communities are susceptible to wildfire, shown in these kind of purple zones here, coastal flooding along the coast, and lava flow hazards, shown here. Here you also see existing homes. Those are the yellow dots on the map, and new homes projected for the future, shown in black. Again, we have the double donut charts to help us understand the risks of existing development patterns and know how we're forecasted to do in the future for these risks. And Hilo would like to remind us that these are island-wide numbers that we're looking at. There's going to be some need for local analysis in light of our community goals to really understand the risks of hazards. That being said, in the coming months, Hilo is going to consider how to protect existing homes, how to slow the pace of development in high hazard areas, and what types of public investment to make in those high hazard areas. This wraps up my overview of conservation and hazards. To summarize, more people will equal more development in sensitive places. For the path we're on, the trend as we're using it tonight, the percentage of homes in sensitive areas stays about the same. But county programs and policies could change the future development patterns in particular areas to address the local conditions. Now I'll hand it back over to Ron. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent overview, Bethany. As Bethany mentioned, we did want to get your feedback on one planning tool that we've tested on a very preliminary basis. As I've mentioned throughout the evening, we're going to test your response to different options that we might employ as a county. We do know that agriculture is an important part of our local economy, and the preservation of productive ag land is a high priority community goal. So we tested a simple future scenario designed specifically to achieve that goal. And it does something very basic. It uses good data we have from UH about known productive agricultural areas. And we both know where those are and what the type of agriculture that is found on in those areas. And so we use that information to assign minimum lot sizes based on the scale of production. So to give you an example, in the Ka'u area near Pahala Wood Valley, we know that you can make a living using raising high-value niche crops like coffee, flowers, etc. And so in cases where we knew that was a viable type of crop, we assigned a minimum lot size of 5 acres. In other areas, say those that are well suited for pasture or large-scale crops like macadamia nuts, we assigned a minimum lot value of 40 acres. Now, I know a lot of you are probably wondering, wait, this is a taking if you don't allow, if you actually downzone my property. But that's not what the model does. The model doesn't change anyone's entitlements. It's not a taking anyway. All it does is restrict in the future parcels from getting a change of zone that would drop the allowable minimum lot size below what we assigned it in the model. So if you're currently zoned Ag 20, but in an area that's viable for coffee, then you could get a change of zone down to Ag 5, so 5 acre minimum lot size. Okay, so applying that very simple tool, and a computer is very handy in allowing us to do that, we learned some very interesting things. Well, here, first off, let me give you an example of what that looks like on a map. So the green areas are those identified as productive ag land. So when you run the model, given these new rules, it keeps new housing generally away, not universally, but generally away from those known areas. And what we found is that that simple tool is very effective at preserving known productive agricultural land and has very little, if any, impact on measures related to other community goals. So again, just one possible idea. It obviously would have to be tweaked, refined, tailored to local conditions. But as a general concept, we'd like to know what you think of that approach. And this is one of several questions tonight that we call idea testing questions. And they're simply that. It's an idea that we know might be effective in helping us achieve our goals. They've been employed in other communities. We can learn from their experience, adapt it to our local conditions. But in general, we'd like to know what you think of this general approach to preserving agricultural land. And when answering this, consider both your conditions as well as those of your grandchildren. It simply only allows changes of zone in the future to a lot size that is viable for the known, for crops or other types of ag production that are known to be feasible in that locale. You know, like I said, these are all the details of these sorts of models would have to be worked out. There'd obviously be, exemptions that would be possible depending on local conditions. We're not going to go into the detail now. We'd just like your feedback on the general concept. Again, it's not a taking of any kind. It's simply not allowing an upzone to a lot size where we know it wouldn't be viable for the type of agriculture that we know is productive in a particular area. Right. Okay, so I think we've gotten our responses. A few more straggling in. Okay. Okay, yep. Yes, it always does depend on specifics, but generally people seem that if it can be applied in this way, in a way that's fair to landowners, that it might be an appropriate tool to explore. Thank you. Okay, so we've covered the conservation and hazards landscape. We're now going to turn our attention to the other three, and they're in many ways intertwined and interrelated, and so we're going to try to connect them as we go along, and we're not going to take them in order either. We're first going to share with you a bit about development patterns, and then return to land use policy and building blocks. For a little historical context, it's interesting to consider how current development compares to Hawaii Island's quote-unquote original general plan. So some historians, based on records, were able to map or at least estimate settlement patterns pre-Western contact on Hawaii Island. And it's interesting to overlay on that the current settlement pattern. Again, look, Kona and Kohala seem somewhat similar, but when you look at areas like Ka'u and Puna, quite a difference. To give you an idea of how planners like Hilo think about these development patterns, we have two primary urban centers, Hilo and Kona, visitor centers in Waikoloa and Kona, and as has been mentioned already, we have large underserved growth areas, primarily but not uniquely in the Ocean View and Puna areas. In addition, in general, we are a very rural community with very low population density relative to other communities in the United States. One important note that Hilo reminds us of is these patterns were established long ago, many of them in the 1960s, long before Hilo and certainly the rest of us started working as planners. Okay, so Doug earlier mentioned that we used a lot of data and analysis, primarily in many cases from SMS Hawaii. So they gave us a lot of great data and a lot of good charts. So you have can understand what you're seeing here. It's really two different things. On the bottom with the bar charts, it's showing you the rate of growth. And so what you see through the middle of the chart is dips and rises, right? And so those really represent the housing boom cycles that we've experienced in the early 90s and then again in the mid-2000s. The line shows you the general population of the island in a given year. So we have that historically up through about 2015, and then the second half of the chart to the right is the forecast into the future. And it assumes, as you can see in the bar charts below, a certain rate of growth based on past precedent. The red and purple lines are simply 5% wiggle room, as Doug mentioned. These are approximations, not perfect. So what that really means is we expect about 50% population growth through 2040. What's interesting is, though that's an island-wide number, we do not expect that population will be distributed evenly across the island. Specifically, our models indicate that we'll have greater rates of growth in those underserved growth areas like Ocean View and Puna. This is a very neat tool that Placeway has introduced us to called a heat map. And it's designed to show you in a very visual way settlement patterns and changes in settlement patterns. What you see here on a map is a whole lot of dots, each dot representing an existing house. That's the grayish, brownish color, depending on the quality of your projection. And then what you can do with the heat map is overlay on top of that the trend. So the models we have not only forecast the numbers of people and houses we expect, but where they're likely to land. So I'd like to zoom in on one of these areas, but first toggle back and forth a bit. Just, put your eye on a particular geographic area as I toggle and notice the change. So say Kona, you see that there's not only lots of infill development, we call houses where there's already lots of houses, but also some growth of the urban area. When you look at Puna, you see a lot of greater intensification of existing development patterns. I'll toggle back and forth a few times. You can look at your community and see what's expected. And just so you can see it closer up, I'll zoom in on Puna just for kicks, since many of you here tonight are from Puna. Apologies to those at the remote sites. Can't toggle in this mode, but you can at least see what the expected intensity of development through 2040. Okay, we're talking mostly about housing units and population tonight, but did want to note that we're also tracking many other indicators, including job growth. As you can see, we expect roughly the same pace of growth in jobs although it's interesting and important to note that jobs are primarily located within the major urban centers, and they're forecasted to continue in those areas as well. Okay, so why are we experiencing these trends, and why does it matter? To answer the first question, I'm going to invite Kayla Childs to explain this question of why in the context of land use policy. Kayla spent most of his career in the real estate and land use industries on Hawaii Island, and he currently splits his time between the Hilo and Kona planning offices. Thank you, Kilo. Kilo, I did it again. Kayla.
Thank you, Ron, and aloha, everybody. Good to see you all here. Aloha. Land use policy. One of the key parts of land use policy is, and only one, is where do we grow from here? And in deciding or analyzing where do we grow from here, it's important to first understand where have we already given rights for growth? Where have we already entitled growth, and how much of it? Here in the county, and here's my clicker. Just give me a moment to get it organized. We have already entitled zoning around the entire island on a residential zoning basis. We're not talking about commercial development add-on. For enough housing units to accommodate 852,000 people. That's based on a ratio of so many people on the average island-wide for dwelling units. So it's been based on how many dwelling units and multiplied that by an average. Well, here's our population today, 195,000 approximately, and there's our capacity. We're only using a fraction of that. This is what we're looking at getting at in 2040, 296,000, about another 100,000 people. And even when we get there, we'll be using only about a third of our theoretical capacity. But as where we are today, we're only using less than a fourth of what's already been granted in entitlements for zoning. So even, how many years would it take us to use this this is all theoretical, of course. How many years would it take us to achieve what we've already zoned? Based on the trends that we have today, it would take approximately 90 years until the year, I think, 2107 at our current rate of growth to use it. Our current county general plan allows for more zoning rights to be granted. Naturally, where zoning exists today, it's understandable that it's not necessarily where everybody will want to live and where maybe some other better decisions can be made. So the current general plan allows for a wider area to be permitted if the council policymakers find that it makes sense. The point merely is that we have enough zoning for more than 4 times what we have here today and more than 3 times what we'll have by 2040. And the general plan, as we have it today, will accommodate a lot more than that if our policymakers choose to do that. So we have plenty of room to grow. And where would this growth occur? The growth primarily, and this reflects what you've seen on the prior slides that Ron has gone through, this shows where the capacity for that 850,000 people or perhaps 250 or 300,000 homes would be. The light or the bluish colors are low density areas. That doesn't mean condos way up in the mountains here all the way around the island. These are low density areas of probably 5 to 40 acre lots where in theory, by zoning rights, you're allowed to build a home and maybe 2 homes depending on permissions. For sense of context, this is Hawaiian Ocean View Estates with kind of a medium green. That's kind of in the middle there. We all know that's 1 acre lots. Over here in Paradise Park, those are 1 acre lots. To give you some idea, in the urban areas of Hilo, Waikoloa area, and Kona, you see more of the red. That's where the volume is, the space on the map is very small, but there's a lot of density potential there. Important factor though is what about all these areas that are that light blue color that we just saw? What does that mean? That's where most of the capacity is, out here in what we commonly call Lower Puna and actually parts of Upper Puna. and down here in Ka'u, principally in the Hawaiian Ocean View Estates area and down in the area near Waihina Nahalehu area. This is where we have existing lots that are already there. They're ready to build. You can have catchment water. There's no public water, but you can build if you'll do a catchment water. You can build if you put in your own wastewater treatment system. Typically today, that's a septic tank and leach field system. You don't have to wait for a subdivision meeting today's subdivision code standards. There's no extra fees involved. You're good to go if you're happy with catchment water. In a way, it's sort of like the law of physics that says when objects get heated up, they tend to want to get more space around them. Just like if the air conditioning went off here, we'd probably want to go outside. Same as air compressed into a balloon, it wants to get out. And when people who want to buy a home can't find anything where they want to really be, near where they work, where the schools are, they go to where they can get it. The low pressure zone, in effect, are all these existing substandard subdivision lots in the rural areas where you can simply drive a little farther, and without regard to the fact that there's no water supply, the roads may not be paved, the police may not come around very often, there's no parks, and you have to drive farther for schools, but you can own your house, and you can own it right now. Draws a lot of people, just like a low pressure system in the sense of airflow or anything else, to go ahead and settle here and worry about those other problems later. This is the principal reason why most of the capacity is not only here, but this is where most of the growth is occurring today, because it's so easy to actually go out and build. You don't have delays, and you don't have the higher expense of getting a place in an urban area. So what? What do we do with that? This is our existing condition. We are not a world where we can make, in a place where we can make a decision about where should we allow substandard subdivisions or what standards should they have. They exist by the tens of thousands. This is a factor we have to figure out how to deal with. From this point, I'll turn it back over to Ron. He'll lead us into that discovery.
Thank you, Kayla, for that very passionate explanation of why we're experiencing the growth patterns that we are. Okay, so as you mentioned, why does this matter? Again, everything we're doing is relative to what we understand to be the community's goals. And so this matters because it sends us in some directions that are not necessarily consistent with those goals. On the one hand, as Kayla mentioned, the patterns, as trend indicates, do leave us with lots of housing choices, as he very articulately explained. There are lots of homes of various types, sizes, and costs across the island. Thank you. However, they're not consistently in mixed-use centers, towns and villages where people of all ages can easily meet their needs. To be more specific, more than 1/5 of our population is forecast to be in underserved growth areas in rural parts of the island. And they're typically in or near high-hazard zones and far from services and jobs. As a reminder, one of the community's goals is for designated village, town, and urban centers to serve as the hub of commerce, public services, private services, and new development. In short, the community would like mixed-use centers if it can have them. However, the trend is moving in the opposite direction. So, we have some choices to make as a community, and we'd like your feedback on some of those choices. So, which strategy do you prefer for designating centers of commerce and services where your everyday needs can be met? We got 3 choices here. The first is grow existing towns and villages that are near underserved growth areas. And good examples of those are Keau, Pahoa, and in the Ka'u side, say Na'alehu. So these would be existing towns that are near underserved areas. Choice 2 is establish new mixed-use centers within underserved growth areas, say within Hawaiian Paradise Park or within Hawaiian Ocean View Estates. And third, mixed-use centers are not a priority. Okay, thank you. Evenly split. Thank you very much for that guidance. For another perspective on the so what of the trend in development patterns, I'm going to invite Ian up to talk a little bit about the work he's done related to affordability, since earlier you said that affordability is a high priority. So Ian?
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. So we know that there are two pocketbook issues that are influenced by development patterns. One is the cost of housing and the other is the cost of transportation. On the left, you can see a picture of housing affordability. This is the percent of units affordable, and you can see a couple of different places really jump out on this map. You can see that especially Ka'u with ocean view, and on the east side, Puna is another spot where you'll see the percent of affordable housing is quite large. Let's see here. On the right, though, we see a slightly different perspective, and this is where the largest quantities of affordable housing are. And you can see a couple different places jump out a little bit differently, and we're not necessarily limited to just rural areas for affordable housing. There's actually quite a bit of affordable housing in the urban centers of Hilo and in Kona. People who study affordability and those issues will often look at both housing and transportation costs. And the reason is that housing is typically the largest percentage of a household's budget, typically occupying between 25 and 35% of a household's budget. Transportation is usually the second largest sector, and that's between 15 or 20% of a household's budget, but it can be much more depending on the family and where they live. So on the left, you'll see what we saw before, which is the percentage of affordable housing and where that is on the island. And in the middle, we'll see a different map, which is the percent of affordable units looking just at transportation costs. And it's a different set of places. You can see that often the places that are most transportation affordable are near where people are typically working and shopping, and so in the urban centers of Kona and Hilo. So when you put these together, you get the combined housing and transportation costs, and a different set of areas kind of jumps out. South Kona and Lower Puna are both kind of tend to be more affordable places when we balance these two things out. When we consider the affordability trends, we're looking at where new homes are forecast to be built and how affordable are those locations now. We don't really have a reliable way to forecast how affordability will change, but what we see by and large is a continuation of the current conditions. We see more homes, a few more homes built in affordable places, and a few less built in transportation affordable places. And when you combine those, it kind of evens out, but really you see a continuation of these current trends. And that really most families will find that the total cost of housing and transportation to be very unaffordable, to take a large proportion of their budget. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Doug, who will take us and ask us a few more questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, so I want to ask you about those housing and transportation costs. The first question is very simple. It's how important is it for new housing to offer low housing costs? The next I'm going to ask you about transportation. Well, you've gotten rusty while I've been away here. Okay. Good job. Thank you. Okay, there's a clear pattern there. And now let's ask the transportation question. All righty. Wait, wasn't that the same answer? Very similar. Okay, but good feedback. Thank you. And now I want to do another one of these idea testing things that Ron was talking about. So this is which of these directions should get top priority? More affordable housing in existing towns and villages, or improving services in underserved growth areas, or no change from what we're doing right now? Okay, got it? Yeah, well, from you, it says improving services in underserved growth areas. Okay, good feedback. Thank you very much. And now let's turn it back to Ron to talk about land use policy and development patterns. Sum it up.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Okay, very briefly, in some land use policies have been largely locked in long ago, have combined, and when you combine them with market forces of supply and demand, are driving growth to underserved growth areas. Okay, little side note here. Am I better? Okay. I'm letting off an electromagnetic field, evidently. Little side note here that in addition to all these other factors we need to consider, as I mentioned earlier, all this stuff is complex. We also have a demographic shift that isn't represented just in our population forecast line. We are about a third of the way into peak in, that's going to peak at where 23% of our population is over the age of 65. And that can have significant implications for planning because people who are older often need to live closer to services, both commercial and public, have a harder time traveling long distances, often need services more than others. And so it's an important consideration as our population ages. With that in mind, again, this is anonymous. We'd like to know how old our audience tonight is. Sue, you're voting with two keypads. Okay. Sue just turned 29. Okay, that jives with our earlier poll about a large percentage of the audience being retired. Thank you. Okay, speaking of building blocks, we are now going to turn our attention to the final main component of planning. A little refresher about what it is we're trying to achieve as a community. We'd like to have an effective transportation system, basic access to utilities like water and wastewater, and appropriate public services like emergency and recreation services. And we like to focus those investments in areas designated for growth. It is useful to think about building blocks as two types. On the one hand, we have what we might call foundations like roads, water, and wastewater. And those are closely intertwined with development patterns and are typically required by the county as conditions of new development. On the other hand, we have what we might call supports, and in contrast to foundations, they tend to follow patterns established by land use policy, including policies related to construction of road, water, and wastewater systems and related development. Two members of our team are going to briefly share trends related to building blocks, starting with the foundations. First, we have Leanna Glor, who's going to discuss water and wastewater systems. Leanna is a long-range planner in our Hilo office. Though fairly new to the planning department, she has years of experience in community planning and the private side of site development.
Thank you, Ron. Okay. Okay, I am focused on water and wastewater, and we could talk all night about this subject because it's very complex, but we don't have time for that. So we're gonna just kind of give you some brief takeaways from our analysis. And because we have such a large island, you can see the map here, we have several distinct public systems. And from the map, we can see that we have actual 23 water systems that are public from the county and 6 wastewater systems around the various areas. The purple is the wastewater and the 2 different blues show water. So 23 water systems and 6 wastewater systems. And they serve the various communities, but certainly not all of them, as you can see from the map. The main urban areas of Kona and Hilo are have a lot of blue from the water service, most adequately served with water service. But we see the purple does not expand to the whole urban area of Hilo or Kona. So we see a little bit of a gap between what we have in the water and what we have in wastewater. So that's kind of an issue that we've noticed, and we'll talk about more as we do the general plan. And as a result, though, of the various public systems that we have several private systems that are available that people use. Many people, as we've talked about already, are on water catchment, and some use wells. And then for the wastewater, there's a lot of existing cesspools and a lot of septic systems. So we know that water and wastewater both, excuse me, have requirements for development that depend on the site specifics to that area. So in many cases, there are prerequisites for development, and they can make new projects much more difficult and expensive, and in some cases kind of unfeasible based on the regulations for wastewater. One important example is commercial development or redevelopment. In areas that are outside of a county wastewater service area, Department of Health is who regulates those requirements. And for wastewater management, it is often sometimes infeasible or cost prohibitive to meet that demand for providing a wastewater system. And so certain things can be affected, like apartment buildings and restaurants, as far as commercial projects that are not able to move forward because of a lack of wastewater service to them. Second, water and wastewater requirements. Oh. Did that move right? Did it? Kilo popped up. Oh, okay. So we learned from Kilo that the wastewater services influence where new non-residential development can go. So it's really affecting, it does of course affect residences, but it primarily is affecting our towns and our redevelopment of our towns. These and related challenges are forecasted to get worse or intensify as development expands beyond the existing water and wastewater service areas. So we see from the donuts that the water is currently about 65%, and the trend will go for 57 or 58% on water. And on wastewater, the existing trend is lower numbers because less people are on public wastewater. So right now it's about 16, and the trend for future is about 15. So we're not really making any headway as far as our trend for wastewater. So with that note, we'll turn it back over to Ron, briefly.
Okay, thank you, Leanna. We all know we have limited resources and have to make choices about how to spend them. So we'd like your quick feedback on how you would prefer limited water and wastewater budgets be spent. Choice 1 is existing towns and villages that are growing. Choice 2 is existing towns and villages that are not growing. And 3, mixed-use centers in underserved growth areas. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. My head is already starting to spin all the things we're going to explore now based on your input, so thank you very much. It's very useful. So now I'm going to bring up Hans Santiago. He's going to share some trends related to the other foundational building block, roads, and then he'll briefly discuss building block supports. Born and raised in Hilo, Hans has been making great contributions to the planning department for 18 years. Thank you, Hans.
Thank you, Ron.
Good evening, everyone. Like Liana, I'm only going to touch on the basics. First, it's important to understand that the road ownership and maintenance here in Hawaii County is varied. We have a large, complicated network of state, county, federal, and private roads, as you can see on the map. Like some of our development patterns, many of the private roads are a legacy of the decisions that was made in the 1960s, and some communities struggle with road construction, maintenance, and connectivity. So that all translates into historic development patterns also impact congestion. As shown on the map, areas in orange are overcapacity and areas in red are significantly overcapacity, as evidenced by many people who travel those roadways. Because of large distances between population centers and job centers, many have long commutes and heavy traffic. So, unfortunately, those trends are expected to continue as populations shift to underserved areas. And as you can see, percent of homes near congested arterials will increase, and the number of homes on private roadways should increase. And I'll turn it over to Ron for a few questions. Oh, Doug, excuse me.
Thank you, Hans. So, no thank you for the congestion pictures. But so, where would you prefer limited road budgets be spent? Okay, anybody still thinking? All right. On busiest commuter highways, I have a trick for you. I knew you were going to answer that. So I'm going to ask it again, and I'm taking that answer away. I didn't know, just guessed. Okay, yeah, a little harder this time, maybe. What do you say between existing towns and villages and underserved growth areas? This group splits it down the middle. That's very interesting, and it'll also be interesting to get feedback from the remote locations and roll that in and see. This is just great grist for Hilo. Here's again idea testing. It's just an idea. It's about mass transit. So one of the things people often talk about for reducing congestion is making more investments. In this case, we're asking about significant county investments in upgrading mass transit. This is a 7-point scale, and you can answer any number 1 through 7. Those just are like fillers, 2, 3. So you can vote 2 or 3 or 5 or 6. What's the definition of mass transit? Yeah.
Good answer, Doug.
It's a good answer. I'm not allowed to answer because I don't want to sway the. Yeah. Okay. If it's not an answerable question, then don't answer. Yeah. That's our rule. It's if it's not good, just don't vote. Yeah. But if it means something to some of you, we'll be interested in that. Okay. And if there's more you want to tell us, please write it down on the yellow form. Love to hear more what's going on there. Okay. Now, this next question, I guess I'm asking this one too, is in existing towns and villages, who should bear the cost of what we're calling these new foundations, collector roads, water, and wastewater systems? And the possible answers are the county, with the cost shared county-wide, or developers, with the cost indirectly passed on to new residents who are buying the houses that developers built, or some combination of the above.
Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. If it's in an existing town and village, how can the developers be retroactively
No, so this is what we're. Let me just repeat the question. So it's in the area of existing towns and villages. Who should bear the cost of new ones? Yeah. You can if that wasn't clear first, just push your button again. It'll cancel out your last vote. Okay. Ready? Okay, some combination of the above. Looks like the winner on that one. Now, same question, but this is for underserved growth areas. Again, if there were new foundations of collector roads, water and wastewater systems, who should bear the cost? And note, answer 2 is different this time. So answer 1 is still the county with cost shared countywide. Answer number 2 is property owners in the area. And answer 3 is some combination thereof. Okay, thank you. Some combination of the above comes through again. Good. So now I'm going to ask Hans to come back up here. And Hans, whoa, did I go too fast? Wait. There. Back to you.
Now I'll share what we learned about the support side of building blocks. So communities require a wide range of supports, which could include fire, police, hospitals, schools, parks, emergency services, and a whole number of things. These supports or facilities typically follow development patterns. So given what we know about the current trends in development patterns, it's not surprising to see that fewer homes will be near current supports. The percent of homes near current bus routes and parks is going to decrease. So the distance to current emergency services is going to get slightly longer. And this is likely to prove particularly problematic for our population as it ages. So one of the decisions that we have to make is where do we invest in future supports or facilities as we move forward. And I'll turn it back over to Doug. Thank you.
What a team. Okay, so how would you rate your current access to public services, the ones Hans was just talking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Very good. Thank you. Okay, so that's the end of the building blocks section. And just to sum it up, Hilo says trends are putting much of development in places that currently lack infrastructure and services. I think you got that story from the data we've shown. So now again, think through all these different layers. We've talked about conservation and hazards, land use policy, building blocks, development patterns. Let's ask this question again. Remember the one from earlier, it's your priorities. And again, you vote 3 times. And if you're in a remote site, put a 1 by your first choice, a 2 by your second choice, a 3 by your third choice. And here, push your buttons in that order. I'm closed. I'm not open for business yet. I was hoping it would automatically open, but not to worry. I know what to do as soon as I can find the mouse. Okay. Just give it a second. It has to do things. Okay, I'm open for business. Okay. So this says conservation first, cost of housing second, and more stores, services, and jobs near, no, traffic congestion third. What did we answer last time? It was conservation first?
Same thing.
Same, yeah.
Same thing.
Same thing, okay. Haven't changed your mind, you're Full of your convictions. All right. Let's just try it on. Yeah. Well, let's try the 25 to 50 years out. Okay. Think about your grandchildren who are going to be grown up at that time. What do you think? Yeah, this is for the next generation. Yeah. Just once. Yep. So you voted your top priority for your next generation, right? Everybody got that? Yeah, okay. Cost of housing went up some. Interesting. Good. Thank you. So conservation, cost of housing, and more stores, services, and jobs near my home, near my kids' home. I don't know. Okay. So now I want to move on to the next section of our topics, and that's about this idea of alternative scenarios. So essentially, these are potentially different paths from the path we're on. And remember, we said that it's potential that we as a community could make choices that result in different future outcomes. And in particular, we're going to talk about reshaping development patterns, potentially. And we're going to talk about sort of trade-offs between investing in existing towns or underserved growth areas. A way to think about this is that what we saw in the building blocks section in particular is there's this mismatch. There's not alignment, the way there's sort of supposed to be, between development and supporting infrastructure. And the question now is it better to move the building blocks underneath where the development kind of naturally wants to go? Or is it better to try to steer the development over on top of where we already have infrastructure? Get it? Those are sort of two different scenarios that we want to talk about more. We are still, I want to be clear, we're still following the same community goals. These haven't changed in these scenarios. It's not like we're changing our mind about what's important. It's that we're exploring some different possibilities for how to achieve those goals. As we do this, we're still going to be using numbers to measure those scenarios. But we don't have time to show you all the donuts for all of the different options. If you want to see all the donuts, they're on the posters outside. But here, right now, we're going to use what we call composite measures. And composite measures basically put all the donuts in a blender, and is that a blender? I don't know. And make what we call a composite score. And the composite score is very simple. It's just a bar chart. A bigger bar is better, right? So, for example, for the trend, if we do these composite scores, you can see that's existing on top in light blue and trend in a darker blue right underneath it, in case you can't see the labels. So up in the upper left corner, that's conservation, all those measurements, and the existing and trend are about the same. Hazard avoidance, also about the same. Building blocks, trend is not performing well on these measures. Now, these are our measures. Again, these are the way we've been calculating it. It's important that you think too. It's important, remember I said this earlier, that these are just some numbers to use as guides. But we're very interested in what you think the priorities are. Maybe you'd put more weight on some things than others. Maybe you have some other ideas about it. So use these as guides for what we're measuring. And if you do, you see that trend does terribly on building blocks and terribly on this composite measure we're calling mixed-use centers, which is the idea that we've been talking about all along, an important part of the general plan of having mixed-use centers. So that's where trend stands, and now I'm going to turn it over to Ron to talk about some of these potential alternative scenarios.
Okay, thank you again, Doug. So, big question that is assumed when doing scenario planning is how much change is really possible. So a fundamental question we have as a community, do we adapt to the trends as best we can, or do we try to influence those trends? It is likely that the answer will be a combination of both, because on the one hand, much is beyond our control. Large parts of the island are already subdivided into large tracts that are buildable. We have very little, if any, control over the real estate market. But on the other hand, there are proven tools for steering new development into existing towns and villages and mixed-use centers away from underserved areas. So it will boil down to what choices we make as a community. As Doug has explained, planners use scenario models to test alternatives to the trend. And we'd like to introduce you to two that we've tested so far. The first we call the CDP scenario, and again, CDP stands for Community Development Plan. As I noted earlier, since the last general plan review, CDPs have been developed for most regions in the county. They are clear expressions of community vision and priorities, so it's only natural that one of our alternative scenarios would apply CDP strategies. We focus just on land use strategies, which, as you expect, given our community goals, generally concentrate growth in regional and neighborhood centers and preserve open space and views. And on the screen, you have a few regional examples of that. What the Kona CDP tries to do with its strategies, it clearly defines an urban growth area, and within that identifies preferred areas for what they call transit-oriented development hubs, as well as traditional neighborhood development hubs. Those are the circles on the map. South Kohala took a slightly different approach, using more general land use designations to identify preferred areas for different types of development. And Puna did something akin to Kona, identifying clearly preferred neighborhood, town, and regional centers. So again, we have our handy-dandy heat map to show us how that would shift trends. So let's see how it does relative today and the trend. So again, you have existing on the screen now. You've seen trend before. It's the same heat map you saw earlier. Now watch closely. As you might expect, when you look at the CDP scenario, the development in the future becomes more compact. Again, I'll toggle back and forth a few times. Puna has pretty significant differences. Kona, you also see more compact forms of development. Okay. So, you saw an earlier version of these composite charts that Doug showed you, just comparing trend to existing. So again, on top is existing. Second row in dark blue is trend, and the new bar is CDP. Again, these are our scores, and you should just use them as guides in your own thinking. And you can see on the charts, existing trend and CDP. CDP does nicely on hazard avoidance because there are fewer homes in areas at risk for sea level rise, tsunami hazards, and wildfire risk. Does a little bit better than trend on building blocks, and somewhat better on your mixed use score, providing a better variety of housing types. But it does not quite do as well as we might hope. In other words, CDP strategies are only partially successful in achieving our community goals. Do you want to do this, Doug, or have me do it? All right. So, quickly, you've seen existing conditions, where we expect to be on trend, and now an alternative scenario to the trend scenario. What do you think about this first alternative called Community Development Plan, or CDP? Okay. Thank you. Leaning a little towards favorable, but lots of questions. So the CDP scenario moves us in the right direction, but it is only partially successful in achieving our goals, our community goals. So over Pauhana one day, a bunch of us in Hilo were talking story about this and thought, hey, what if we added some juice to the CDP scenario to see if we can shift those bars a bit further? Not surprisingly, Hilo thought it would be fun to call it IPA. For Infrastructure Priority Area. So what this scenario does is work extra hard to achieve the key community goals as identified in the CDPs of aligning population centers, infrastructure, and services in mixed-use centers across the island. It assumes the use of ambitious strategies that have proven effective elsewhere. Some we know may prove infeasible in our context, but we wanted to at least see what would happen and then gauge your support for those outcomes. So Hilo reviewed his notes from planning graduate school and came up with some objective criteria for selecting IPAs within each region around the island. In short, the areas that currently do the best job of meeting community goals were selected, those with a diversity of building blocks and the most components of mixed-use centers. And you see them represented on the map here. There's one within each community. Just so you know, we knew that IPA centers, just those areas defined on that map, had enough zoned capacity, which Kale explained earlier, to accommodate all of our forecasted growth through 2040. But to keep the model within the realm of possibility, we had the computer only shift 50% of the new growth into those IPA centers. To give you an example of what that looks on a more local basis, and to show you that the model was not rigid in the way it worked, projects that are known to be in the pipeline were allowed to grow at normal rates outside of APAs. On the map here, you see the blue boundary of a predefined IPA. In some areas outside of that, the model incentivized new housing within the IPA, but not in all areas. Oh, no. Doug? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We engaged Doug just for his technical capacities with a laptop. Okay. So, again, got our handy-dandy heat map. Today, expected trend, CDP, and IPA. I'll do that again. Let me do it all the way from trend. Trend, CDP more compact, look particularly in areas like Kona and Puna, and then even more compact with IPA. Now, to some extent, this is harder to see on the heat map, so we're going to show you those composite scores to see the real difference between trends. Kaboom. So, Doug, are you introducing this slide, or am I continuing here? All right. So, IPA is now in green compared to dark blue trend and light blue existing. And as you can see, it does really well on all the measures. Conservation one is mostly because it's putting fewer new homes on productive ag land. Building blocks is better because we're putting the new centers in places that already have building blocks. And the mixed-use centers is how we design the scenario. So, of course, it does well. So, what do you think of this potential alternative? No, just forces more of the new development into those mixed-use centers. Yes. Communities that are known already to have reasonably high levels of a mix of uses, residential, commercial, and a reasonable level of public services, combination of supports and facilities, foundations. So that is an important point. The question for those remote sites is, do these models do anything with infrastructure? And the answer is no. They simply shift housing patterns. So again, that's part of our next steps in our work, right, is getting a sense for people's preferred settlement patterns. Then obviously you have to adapt priorities for infrastructure improvements based on those preferred patterns, right? Okay. votes? Okay, again, people like the general direction based on the simplistic rules of this model. Okay. All right, bear with me. I know we're getting towards the end here. So, am I still doing this, or this you done? Yeah, why don't you take
All
it?
right.
Okay.
So if this question is, if this were the plan and we were trying to pick those centers, we showed 14 of them on the map, picked by Hilo's graduate school buddies, I guess. Here's some different ideas for criteria for picking those centers. So prioritizing existing public infrastructure and services, prioritizing existing population, or prioritizing forecasted population. So would you put the centers where population is now or where it's forecasted to go? Number 4 is forecasted population and fewest services. Would you put a lot of investment in saying, well, there's going to be a lot of people there and not a lot of services, so that's where we should put it? Or would you go with even geographic spacing, so everybody has, a short drive to one of these centers? Or would you pick some other factor not listed above? Okay, I'm going to call it there. Oh, very interesting. Thank you for that answer. Oh, that's good. It's very good feedback. Okay, so now just to sum up, the composite scores for all the scenarios, again, according to our scoring method, which you should use as a guide, that's existing on top, then trend, then CDP, then this IPA. Okay? So based on that, million-dollar question, what would be your preferred scenario out of those 3 that we showed, trend, CDP, or IPA? Okay, I'm closing it in 3, 2, 1. IPA. In this room, it's saying big preference for IPA. Okay, thank you. So now we want to ask you a few more ideas about new housing in existing village and town center, steering new housing into existing village and town centers and away from underserved growth areas. Again, these are just some ideas on how it might be done, and we're looking for your reactions. So the idea is that the county could try, not necessarily could, but could try to steer new housing into existing village and town centers and away from underserved growth areas through perhaps reducing the cost of building additional housing units on existing lots. In existing village and town centers. Get it? So you have an existing lot, you could build an additional, could be an Ohana. Planners call these accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, right? So this question, and we're talking about existing centers, okay? So it's a 7-point scale. Are you opposed to that idea? Do you favor that idea? Or are you neutral? Is that clear? Or anywhere in between. Yeah, you can vote any number of those. Okay, let's see what you think of that idea. This looks like strongly favor that idea. Okay. How about this idea? Same thing. We're same goal in mind, but here the strategy is to provide incentives like property tax exemptions, proactive rezones, expedited permit review, basically incentives for new development in these existing villages and town centers.
Is that asking for new development, or is it speaking back, is it tied to the ADUs?
No, this is separate from the ADUs. This is just new development of any kind. Okay. Still favor, maybe not quite as strongly, and there's some strong opposition on that one too. That's called a bimodal distribution. Okay, this is a third idea of the same ilk. Now what we're asking about is waiving developers' fair share assessments. You know, fair share is a fee that developers have to pay for roads, sewers, parks, police, and fire. And the idea would be to waive those fees, make it easier to develop in those areas. Okay, got it? 3, 2, 1. That didn't go over well at all. Okay, but great feedback, thank you. And finally, this is sort of the fourth idea in this sequence, which is expanding existing foundation, what we call foundations in this talk. That's the collector roads, water, and wastewater systems. And again, it's in existing areas, right? When we say expand, we mean in the existing areas. Okay. Oh, wait. Still thinking? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right, so now let's put all those together. And of those, which do you prefer? If you don't like any of them, just don't answer. So like if you're opposed to all of them, you can say no, don't answer. But if you prefer Ohana units, incentives, fair share, waiving fair share fees, or expanding foundations, or some combination of the above. Is there a question? Yeah, right. So the thought was we should have a line item that's oppose all. And so instead of doing that, we just had a don't answer. But I hear the feedback. Another thing we know is how many responses there are to each question. So of people who voted, some combination was the preference. All right. Well, great job on all your voting. This is really good feedback. And now let's turn it to Ron to start wrapping up.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, thank you, Doug. So, as a reminder, we're handing off everything we've learned tonight to Hilo. He's going to come back to us with recommendations for how to revise the general plan. Specifically, he's going to use your feedback to shape a preferred yet realistic scenario that best achieves the community's goals. And Hilo will Hilo will keep the rest of the team very busy, however, doing these sorts of things. Lots of additional focused analysis. And again, your guidance tonight was invaluable in helping us decide which options not to pay much attention to, others to focus on and test for feasibility. Clearly, a lot of consultation with people who really know and work intimately with many of these issues every day, folks from water supply, environmental management, public works, other state agencies. Flesh out elements of what might be a preferred scenario and do further testing on feasibility, on preferences, et cetera. In that process, get additional public input, all towards the goal of refining implementation strategies that complement policies established in the GP. So, we also find it very useful to get your feedback on how we do with these public engagement exercises. So if you could quickly give us your sense for how well we did tonight. Doug's job is on the line here. Or perhaps mine. Right. Right. Okay. All right, thank you. Again, we do appreciate your comments on the yellow forms as well. Questions, comments, suggestions, any input you may have. And we have plenty of them over there if you'd like to use more than one. Now let's turn it back to April to wrap things up.
Thank you all. So thank you for being here tonight. This is invaluable information. Again, we are recording this session tonight, and we're also recording the Thursday night session in Kona, and we will be making those available along with the keypad polling questions online as well. So please tell your friends about that. Share our web link to them and anyone you know so that you can stay in touch with what we're doing. You can also sign up on our website. There's a thing called Contact. And you can click on that and sign up with your email. And so as we make updates available and do news releases and things like that, you will automatically get those emails and those notices. Just a few reminders. Please make sure you leave your yellow sheets with us before you leave here tonight with any comments and questions. Please make sure you put your contact information on those for us so we can get back to you. Also, your keypads, please don't forget to leave those keypads. We're gonna, really rally you at the door to make sure we get your keypads, so we have to get those back. Out front, again, we have the posters. Huge apologies for the lighting out there. If we need to, we can bring them in. If we have enough interest, we can try to, oh, the lighting got turned on? Really? Okay, good. So it sounds like we may have better lighting outside, so that is hopefully helpful. So we also have sticky notes available if you want to jot notes and stick them on those boards. We also have little stickers we're going to have one of the ladies outside with little stickers that you can put your preferences on things. The colors don't mean anything, right, Keiko? The colors don't mean anything. It's just a sticker. So if there are certain things you like, put a sticker on it. And if you don't like, don't put a sticker on it. So let's see, what else? Oh, also tell your friends about Thursday night. So we're having exactly one of these sessions Thursday night, although hosted in Kona, but we will still be here with a remote site. Also Waimea, also Waimea, Naalehu, and Pahoa, excuse me. So those are our other 3 remote sites for the Thursday night session, same time, 6 o'clock. And lastly, I just want to thank Doug and Ron and Ian and our entire general plan team for all the hard work they've done that's gone into this effort and will continue to go into this effort for the next year and a half so we can get it to council. Again, thank you for being here. Please drive safely going home. Watch out for those wet roads tonight. We're going to be hanging around, so if you have specific questions for some of us, you're welcome to come up to us, but otherwise we will see you next time and keep you posted with the next round of input. Thank you. Oh, lastly, one thing, we have these fancy little QR codes. If you have a QR thing on your phone, back at the back table, you can't scan them on the screen, but on the back table, we have this screen printed out. So if you want to just scan them with your QR code detector, you can automatically pull up the website. Thanks.